they may be here. Okay, I'm heading into the woods where I heard the sounds. I could hear them. I could hear them on the parabolic. I could hear them walking. It was definitely bipedal walking. I could hear they were making like little whooping sounds and grunting sounds. And I absolutely believe the Sasquatch are here. And I'm absolutely terrified. But we gotta get up here. Hello gang, and welcome to SquatchSpot.com. I'm Darrin Smith, and I'm very excited about this episode because right now we are heading back into that area of interest where I encountered the Sasquatch. I'm a little nervous because of what I discovered on camera, and that is I believe I captured the Sasquatch
that was hiding in that thick brush area. I believe I captured it on camera, and I am going to be sharing that with you here on this episode. And what happened was I was receiving messages from you guys about that incident, and 3 Flash Can in particular said that he had spotted something on the footage down where I was near that heavy brush, and I really wanted to take some time to investigate it. And while investigating it last night, I discovered something very compelling, and I've shared it with a number of researchers who also agree that it very likely could have been the Sasquatch that I had followed down into that heavy brush area. As you recall, when I was moving into that location, there was those trees, that cluster of trees at the bottom of the hill that I was really apprehensive about. And in hindsight, I absolutely believe that that's where the Sasquatch was hiding. And that's where I got the interesting footage from. So I'll definitely be sharing that with you guys on this episode. Right now, though, we are heading back into that area. And as I mentioned, I'm a little nervous about it because the footage that I'm going to be sharing with you guys, the thing was looking at me. The thing was watching me move into that area, and it was hiding in the in that tree cluster. So I don't know what the Sasquatch's motivation was that day, and I don't think any of us actually know what's going on in their heads. And there's a bunch of researchers out there who are concerned that they may be a little more aggressive than what we're giving them credit for. There's some people that believe that the Sasquatch are abducting people, and there's a bunch of people out there that are painting these creatures out to be monsters. And I'm not sure what was going on the day that I discovered them. I don't know if they were trying to lure me into that brush so they could ambush me, or if they were just hiding, but it did sound like there was more than one of them, and if that tapping sound was some sort of covert communication between the two of them, then to be honest, I'm a little concerned that something sinister was going on at that moment. And I think that screeching bird absolutely had a concern of danger as well. So I don't know. There are numerous reports out there where people encounter Sasquatch and they are so taken back by the experience that they never venture into the woods again. These are people, even Forest Service people, that spent the majority of their younger years in the forest, and they have one encounter with a Sasquatch and they move into the big city and they never go back into the woods again. So I can understand how it could be very intimidating to have an up close and personal encounter with them. My sighting, there was a distance, so it wasn't like the thing was standing right in front of me, with drool coming off its fangs. It wasn't like that. It was at a distance, it was fleeting, it was moving through the brush, and it just really got me excited for the phenomenon and to have another experience. But to be standing in front of one and to be, I don't know, but maybe today we'll find out, because we are heading in there. I do think that the snow has subsided, so we should be able to get in there, and I am nervous about the whole thing, but we got to get up there, and I'm gonna try to keep this camera running as long as possible, because as I mentioned the last time, I discovered some missing files, video files on this camera, and both the audio recorders went down and my Garmin GPS unit went down. I did take a poll asking you guys if you believe that the Sasquatch is responsible for causing these electronic failures. I think it's very unusual that it occurs often when they're around. And I've mentioned on numerous occasions that I've been on 3 expeditions where I watched across-the-board technology failure while the Sasquatch were in close proximity to us. And I've experienced it on a number of occasions while out in the woods. You saw in that one episode the audio recorder go out, and I later discovered that 3 other pieces of equipment go out. And I absolutely wholeheartedly believe that we were right on top of the Sasquatch that day. In fact, if this footage that I'm going to be sharing with you guys was the Sasquatch I was following, it was probably within, I'd say, 30 to 40 feet from me. So that's close. And so I did ask you guys, I haven't seen the poll results yet, but if you guys, I'm interested to hear what you guys think. So if you haven't voted yet, definitely hop back on that previous video and vote. All you have to do is tag it, touch it, and the poll will come up and you just click it. It won't take you away from the video or anything. It'll just display right there on your screen. So definitely do that if you haven't voted, because I'm really starting to believe that the Sasquatch is absolutely responsible for the equipment failures. And if that's the case, we're dealing with something very unusual here. And that's why I'm really nervous about heading up here, because if these things have extraordinary abilities, then it's a little concerning. So I'm going to turn off the camera. I will turn the camera on again as we're pulling into the area. I want to make sure my recorders are going this time in case we hear the vocalization again. I absolutely believe the Sasquatch are still hunkered down in this location. I think that's a very strategic reason why they're there, and I believe they're going to stay there until it's time for them to move up into the backcountry for the summer months. So yes, I'm nervous, I'm excited, and let's do this.
So here we are. I have returned to that area where I had the incident last month, and just up there on that embankment was where I heard the initial vocalization. And of course, this is where my car is parked, and this is where I headed into the woods to follow the bipedal movement that I was hearing. And I'm a little nervous to be heading back in here, only because I have seen these photographs, and the still pictures look a little terrifying. And it's one thing to be passively out looking for Bigfoot, but I'm actually engaging them, and I have tracked down their movement patterns, and I also found areas where they are spending a lot of their time. So I'm actively engaging them at this point, and it's a little concerning because looking at the footage of that incident, I was probably within 30 feet of this thing, and I can only imagine what they're capable of. And in fact, there's just so many graphic horror stories out there what people think the Sasquatch may be doing to unfortunate individuals who end up in their realm. So I'm really concerned for my personal safety heading into this area alone and unarmed. I have the bear mace, and I have all the necessary precautions for the general wildlife that I might encounter out here. Those would be a mountain lion or, bear, that sort of thing, and they really don't pose a threat. The Sasquatch, however, I'm getting in close proximity with them now, and I don't know what their motivations are. So I'm a little nervous to be heading back in there, but I definitely think it's imperative that I get in there and start looking for some concrete physical evidence. So another thing I'm doing is I'm tagging the significant locations of interest for this investigation, and the location behind me here, this tree stump and the log, is where I believe the sentry was located. I saw a lot of compelling ground disturbances that led me to believe that it was situated here, and from here it had a perfect view of me pulling up and parking my vehicle down this embankment. It also has a nice view up the road, and it has a really good view down the road. And I also found some impressions leading away from this area, and although they weren't clearly defined footprints, because if you could see, the ground here is just completely littered with pine needles and debris. It's just really thick, gnarly forest floor. So the impressions, they're not detailed enough, so you can see some disturbances that will imply footprints, but you really can't get really clearly defined tracks in this sort of environment. It's very difficult. But also what I noted was this was the location that the wood knocking was coming from, and I believed that it was hitting this log here because I saw some interesting strike marks on the log here. So I absolutely believe the Sasquatch was positioned in this location. I came up the hillside, not up this way because it was really heavy with snow and it was very slippery, but there was a cleared out spot that let me get up the embankment a little further back. And so right now what I'm doing is I'm just tagging all these locations so that I can transfer them onto Google Earth and get a really good understanding of what happened that day. Okay, I apologize for going handheld here, but I think this is kind of interesting. I'm going to swing the camera around. I'm not convinced that they're tracks, but they are interesting in their shape. And so I'm just going to give you guys a look here. So there's really not a lot of detail here, but I'm not seeing any other like impressions in any of the snow here. I mean, there's no detail. You can't even tell if it's a footprint, but it's just unusual that there's a little indentation in the snow there, but definitely melts it off. It's weird. I don't know if this is just snow that's melting from underneath the snow here, but it's definitely worth documenting. I just like the general shape, but yeah, there's no detail. I don't think this is a track at all, but it was the shape that caught my eye and the size. It definitely sounds like there's something moving around. But I showed you this shot of the brush here. I looked on Google Earth. This brush goes for a significant distance. I think that's one reason the Sasquatch may be hunkered down in this area, just because it's hard to get in if you don't know the entrances to this area. Because look how thick this stuff is. and it's a really sharp. It has like needles on them. It's really sharp stuff, and for sure nobody's going to go powering through this. So this thick brush that I was standing next to, and we're almost at that location where I had the encounter and where those images came from. But I think this is one of the reasons the Sasquatch are hiding in this area, because if they know how to get into this kind of cleared out area near the trees, it definitely has an advantage, because nobody's going to be powering through this stuff. But yeah, it did sound like there was something moving around in there.
On March 3rd, 2020, I followed a Sasquatch deep into the woods using a parabolic microphone to pinpoint its location while I followed its bipedal movement. I followed it down this embankment, which ended in an area of very heavy brush and a very foreboding tree cluster that created quite a bit of emotional anxiety for me. While at this heavy brush, an agitated bird was screeching incessantly, indicating there was a potential danger in the area. After sharing this experience on a previous YouTube video, a number of viewers had contacted me saying they were seeing something curious on the footage that I had shared. So I went back and I took a look at the video footage from that encounter, and I discovered something rather shocking. In the area where the bird was screeching relentlessly, the same area that caused me an incredible amount of emotional anxiety, and where the recorded tapping sounds were coming from, I discovered this curious shape in the tree cluster, which has a haunting appearance of a figure hiding among the foliage while watching me. Yes, I absolutely agree this image is a blob squatch, and is absolutely inconclusive. However, what I do find heart-wrenching is the fact that the figure moves during the video clip and faces a different direction, which to me demonstrates that the figure was an animated being and not an obscure environmental anomaly. I also believe I have since learned the significance of the direction the being had turned, which I will explain during this video. And although this figure's eyes appear uncharacteristically large for a Sasquatch, perhaps as the result of shadowing, I have read eyewitness reports of Sasquatch having very large alien-like eyes, and although this is not my opinion, the thought does send chills down my spine. Also, while reviewing the video footage from that day, I discovered another curious image from that same tree cluster, which I believe could be another shot of the being in question. The figure appeared to be crouched down, and although this video clip was brief, I am intrigued by what appears to be a gorilla-like face, and I also find the body outline proportionately intriguing. Though I do find these images compelling, I cannot fully endorse them. However, what I can attest to is I absolutely believe I was in the presence of Sasquatch that day. The audio recordings indicated the Sasquatch was nearby and somewhere in the direction of that tree cluster, where the bird was screeching incessantly. And I have since made some amazing discoveries that I believe will greatly substantiate my encounter with the Sasquatch that day. And now, after reviewing these findings, I am venturing back into this area to hopefully find some physical evidence, or the beasts themselves.
So I've returned to the heavy brush area, and it's just behind me there. I don't know, well, you can see the log there. There's that tree stump that the camera was positioned on it, and then there was this little log here, and I was standing in front of it. But one thing that's really unusual is the area where the tree cluster was looks really different to me now. It doesn't look as intimidating as it did the last time. And granted, there was a lot of adrenaline going through me. There was a lot of stuff happening, but I couldn't see so far into it, and agreed the sun is definitely in a different position because that was later in the afternoon. So there was a lot more shadow there before. But I came down here specifically to investigate that area because that's where I believe the Sasquatch was hiding. That's also where we heard that distraught bird. So I'm back in that location. It's absolutely quiet up here. It's just dead. I'm afraid that the Sasquatch had probably moved on. But I'm definitely here to investigate this area, especially the little tree clustered area. And I'm going to continue just kind of investigating the surroundings here, because for sure they were here. The big question is, are they still here? Because as I drove up the road, a lot of that snow has melted off, and as I mentioned, I think the Sasquatch are going to stay hunkered down here until the snow starts melting off, at which point they're going to move up to those higher elevation for the approaching summer months. And they have quite a trek to take to get up to those higher elevations. So I think my thought process was, as soon as the snow got manageable, so they weren't going to be having to power through deep snow to get up there, I figured that would be the time when they would get on the move. And I think we're kind of at that point, and it would not surprise me if they have moved on. But let's definitely continue our investigation of this area, and who knows, we might get lucky. So one thing I'm trying to do is to try to recreate the camera's angle as I was moving into this brush. It's difficult because I was holding the camera up, I had it on a tripod, and I wasn't really paying attention to what I was filming. So it was really random how I was filming the area. But I've got the camera set up in roughly the general location that it must have been when it got that shot. And I'm going to go stand now where I believe the creature was standing. Okay, so I couldn't see the camera so well, so I actually moved forward, but I believe the creature was back in that initial location before I moved in. And just by looking at the comparison, the creature must have been a lot taller than I was, because I couldn't get up so high above the branch that it was standing behind. So I'm gonna go take some measurements. But just by first guess, this thing was at least 7.5 feet. So one thing right off the bat I think is interesting is this cleared out area you see down here. This would make a good bedding spot. It's relatively free of forest debris. It's just behind this log that will create a windbreak and also will create a sense of safety and seclusion. Okay, for sure I didn't move this far into this tree cluster area just because, as I mentioned on the previous episode, this area was giving me a lot of agitation. I was having an emotional unpleasantness about this area, so I didn't move in to this area. I moved away from it, and I moved over to where this log is and that tree stump is. So this area definitely was a major concern for me. And also, as I moved around, as you recall in that episode, I decided I have to power through the brush. And this is a little concerning now because, as I mentioned, with the tapping sounds, it sounded like there was at least 2 Sasquatch in the area. One was over here, then one was somewhere behind me, which is just behind the camera here. And what's concerning is, as I powered through the brush down in this area down here, I was circling around the Sasquatch, the one that was situated here. I was actually getting around behind it. And that's not necessarily a good place to be because I was moving into much closer proximity to it. And the one advantage that it had was the cover of the brush. I didn't know where it was, and it was concealed in the vegetation, so it could have easily ambushed me. And as I mentioned, I was having that concern. And as I moved around that brush area, as I was trying to power through that brush, I was getting to a location that was too thick in vegetation, and that thickness in vegetation was this tree cluster where the Sasquatch was hiding. So it was probably a really good thing that I turned around. Still, it really bothers me that I didn't have the courage to follow through, in the sense that I didn't move in and really try to flush this creature out and get the photographic evidence that I'm trying to capture. And I pulled back a ways. I pulled back up this hill, and I positioned myself up in that area, and I was just monitoring this area. And I told you the bird that was screeching that was down here, indicating that there was a dangerous situation. It continued to screech for probably another half an hour while I was up in that area. So the Sasquatch was just hanging out down here for at least that half an hour. That's what I'm assuming. And then once that bird stopped screeching, it indicated to me that the Sasquatch had moved on. And I still remained in that location, and I just monitored the area. But I really do think I was in a very precarious position because there was 2 Sasquatch. From what I'm getting from the audio recordings, it suggested that there was 2 Sasquatch that were flanking me. There was one coming up behind me, and there was one situated in front of me. And I absolutely think that had they attacked me, for sure, I wouldn't be here talking to you guys. For sure, they could have easily had taken me out. The one thing that I thought is maybe it thought that the equipment that I was carrying, especially this camera on the tripod, maybe they were concerned that I had weapons, so they were being very strategic in their approach. And the tapping sounds that were recorded, you hear the 2 taps, that tap, tap, and then a little bit later, it's tap, tap, and then you hear this one other tap back in that area. It's a single tap. And the only thing that's, I'm just going to say, the thing that was going through my mind was the one up here was anxious to jump me. And it was doing the 2 taps saying, should we do it? Should we do it? And this one said no. And I really think, for sure, had they wanted to, they could have killed me. They easily could have ambushed me. I did mention that maybe they thought I had weapons, but I think even at that point, I don't know what their motivations was. Honestly, I don't know. At first I was thinking they were trying to lure me into this brush so that they could get the jump on me. And that made sense in the sense that if they were trying to disarm me. But yeah, I don't know. Okay, these impressions are interesting because they continue down the embankment here. So you have this impression here, just here. This impression is odd because of the angle that it stepped. There's this rock here, but it looks like this is part of that footprint, and it looks to be about the same size as this one. And just so you can see kind of what I'm looking at, I'll pull out a dollar bill here. But there's another one just a little bit down this embankment, and so this is roughly the back of the footprint here, and it goes down like this. These look like they could be toes up in this area, and there's this other impression here, but I'm not seeing toe detail here, and it looks like a kind of an odd angle for the foot to land. But there's other impressions on this embankment that look similar. So I'm just going to apologize right up front. I really have a lot of field investigation to do at the moment, and I don't have a lot of time to be making YouTube video, but I definitely want to include you guys in this process. So I'm going to apologize up front if, one, I'm going to be doing a lot of handheld shots, and also I'm not going to, there's going to be a lot of rough cuts and probably a lot of incomplete sentences. So definitely bear with me, but I definitely had to put my equipment down, and I need to start investigating this area because I definitely want to take advantage of it, because this is an incident site. This is absolutely where the Sasquatch were. There were multiple Sasquatch in the area, and it's really important that we find this physical evidence. And these impressions here are interesting. I want to take some measurements, and I also need to get up into this area. I need to look for scat. I need to look for hair. I need to look for all of this evidence. And granted, we had that break in time where this area was closed down because of the snow, and I couldn't get up here. So there is the possibility that the physical evidence that would be here is damaged. But we gotta try. We gotta try to find that hair, scat, anything physical, any sort of physical evidence. So I'm going to get busy with that. I don't know if you can see it, but the shaded in area behind me, it's at the base of a dead tree. There's this big dead tree in the middle, and then there's some relatively new growth around it. And I believe that this location could actually be a Bigfoot nest. And what that is a lot of times Sasquatch will stay in an area where they have a good food source and they have plenty of water in close proximity to them. And if they find an area where they feel safe and secure and they have access to food and water, they sometimes will stay in that area for a duration. And sometimes they'll even create structures, stick structures. They're not elaborate, but they definitely are intricately woven branches and so on. We don't really know what these stick structures are all about, but there are a number of researchers out there who are dedicating most of their research to these stick structures. So that's definitely something worth investigating. But I believe that this location here is a nest. And one of the reasons I'm saying this is because it's in a really difficult to access area. I mentioned that thick brush with the thorns in them. It surrounds this area, and it's very difficult to get into this area unless you're following a path. And I'm not saying that these paths are game trails, but they do seem to be areas where the brush was cleared out a little bit, and there's a lot of evidence to support that Sasquatch will actually groom game trails to make it easier to get in and out of areas. And I'm starting to see that happening here. And now the camera's position here is strategic because the location just here, just a little bit behind the camera, is where that Sasquatch was standing. And I came down this embankment here behind you, and I ended up almost directly, not quite directly behind the camera, but over in this area. And I think that what was going on here is I was walking in on the nest. I think this is their nest. This is where they were hanging out, and this might have been where the family group was. And the sentry that I thought I was following positioned himself almost between me and the nest, but absolutely from that vantage point where it was located, it could easily get to me, whether it wanted to ambush me or whether it wanted to just get at me to prevent me from getting to this nest. And what's interesting is the position that it was situated. It has two entry points covered. This is one entry point that I came through, and then there's another entry point. When I told you that I was going around that brush when I was powering through it, I was coming in around behind the Sasquatch, and that area where that tree cluster is, there's another tree cluster down here, and that was kind of another cleared out area that was giving me access to this location. And what's strategic about this is the Sasquatch had positioned himself between the two entrances that I was standing next to that would lead me to this nest area. And this is really a huge find because I definitely need to spend some time and see if I can find hair, see if I can find scat in this area, because I'm absolutely seeing a picture here that wasn't clear to me the last time during that encounter. And it is interesting now that there's a Sasquatch behind me, kind of monitoring me from that direction. And then there's this Sasquatch that's blocking both of the entrances to this location. And as I came down that embankment, I couldn't see into here. The shadows were really thick. I must have been here, maybe it was overcast or there was cloud coverage or something, because I couldn't see into this tree cluster and I couldn't see into this vegetation here, which was creating a lot of anxiety for me. So that's why I didn't approach this area. And it's probably a good thing I didn't. I did take note of the path that was coming into this area, and I did take note of it, but I didn't want to move into it because it was there was too much vegetation. There was just too many places a Sasquatch could hide and ambush me. So I wasn't feeling safe moving into such close proximity to the brush here. So I kept a relative distance from this location, and it was probably a really good thing that I did so, because I am seeing evidence here that leads me to believe that this cleared out area and this area underneath the tree, I believe that it is a Sasquatch nest. Tracks are really difficult to take pictures of, but what I'm seeing here is an interesting impression. Goes around like that. It does look good. And there's a couple more around. There's some heading out here, but again, see the pine forest floor that I'm talking about? It's really hard to get clear tracks when you have this sort of heavy debris on the forest floor. It's really difficult. Everybody says, how come you didn't find footprints? Well, good luck finding footprints in here. I'm not leaving any impressions unless I'm on the dirt, like in this moist dirt, like where the snow's melting. But this is an interesting impression here. Some interesting things already noted in this area. So I wanted to show this to you guys again because I think it is interesting, and I think it adds a lot of credibility to the fact that the Sasquatch are using this area, and I believe that they're using this area as a nesting site specifically. But you see these plants here, the thorn plants. I'll show you these over here because it's in the sunlight and you could probably see it better. But these thorn bushes are nasty. I've said it a number of times, but the tips of these look broken off. Whether they were eaten off by an animal or intentionally broken off. But what this does is it creates a pathway so the thorn plants are not growing there. And then there's that other thorn plant around here. So this is the entrance point. They power through this and they head out and they can go wherever they want to go. But you see here these thorn plants as well. It looks like the tips have been broken off, and I think that's really interesting. And I followed this plant down, and I don't think it is the same plant, but it is interesting that the thorn plants seem to be broken off at the tips here. So I don't know if it's more unsettling it being quiet like it is now, or when I was here the last time and that bird was screeching incessantly, but I'm going to swing the camera around and show you a couple more interesting things that I took note of here. As we mentioned, there's two approaches that are easy to get to this location. One is down this path here, that's from that area that you came down the embankment and then come through this brush here. I was standing on the other side of that tree stump, the background there. The other area to come in was that area that I stopped at. So it's back in here. You could come in this way and easily get through and up and into this little area here. One thing I was kind of curious about, I don't know how easy a Squatch can climb a tree, but I was thinking if you can get on top of this dead tree here, it might make an interesting observation platform. I'm not going to try to climb up there. But so here we are with that thick thorn vegetation again. It's really nasty stuff. I mean, look at these thorns on this thing. You don't want to be powering through this stuff. And I mentioned on Google Earth, it goes a really incredible distance in this whole area. It's really thick and it goes on forever. So nothing's going to be powering through here. And there's another dead tree there. But this is interesting. The strategic location of this tree fall. And what's strategic about it is you see the thick thorns everywhere. It's an escape route. It's an escape route for the Sasquatch that are hanging out in their little home here. They can literally walk up here, take a couple of steps. Granted, I'm not a Sasquatch, but we'll get up here. And they can run down this log. They could run down this log. And they have in a couple routes here, they can jump over to that stump there and head out that direction, or they can get to the end of it Again, I'm not a Sasquatch, but they could power through, get to the end of it, and head up in that direction. And it looks like there may be a path up there. That looks cleared out there. So they may be able to escape back into this. So another thing I'm out looking for is scat, because we definitely need that photographic and DNA evidence to establish a solid identification of this animal. And one thing that I'm thinking is I don't think a nest area would really be a good location to look for scat. Although there's a lot of reports that the Sasquatch has a very strong odor about it a lot of times, I don't necessarily think that they want to be adding a lot of scat in their living environment, in their nesting site. So I actually think they would probably relocate like humans would do, go off someplace away from where they would be bedding down. And I could be absolutely wrong about this, but I know that some primates, are not so skittish of their feces as maybe humans are. But I don't know where the Sasquatch is on that scale. I don't know if they're comfortable having it around or if they want to drop it off in a distant location. But it's definitely something that I'm thinking about, and I have been moving around quite a bit looking for scat, and I'm going to continue to do so. It's already getting pretty late in the afternoon, so I'm going to have to be trekking out of the forest here soon. But I do want to continue the investigation of the area, and it's definitely been an enlightening day. I continued scouring the area for any signs of physical evidence, and while doing so, I soon discovered I might not have been alone. You don't want to be creeping up on an animal and boxing it in, because if it feels threatened, they may be here. Okay, I heard something. It sounded like something large moving through the brush. I maintained surveillance for a considerable amount of time. However, I did not hear any more movement in the brush, which concerned me. I'm worried about contaminating this area. If this location is indeed a Sasquatch nest, I'm afraid my presence here could deter them from returning. In any case, the damage is done, and I went back to continuing my investigation of the area. We came here to investigate the haunting images I captured on camera during the encounter I had with the Sasquatch on March 3rd. The figure's change in position, to me, indicates it is an animated being and not a random environmental anomaly. I also discovered in the direction the creature had turned towards is very likely a Sasquatch nest. I discovered some very compelling footprint impressions in the area. I also discovered this area was surrounded by very heavy brush that was covered with needle-sharp thorns. However, I also discovered a number of these plants seemed groomed in a way that created two distinct pathways leading into the nest. I also concluded this very large tree fall created an ideal escape route from this nest area. However, my most compelling physical evidence I discovered while investigating this area are the numerous black hairs I discovered in this nesting area. Hairs that could prove without a shadow of a doubt that I had encountered Sasquatch that fateful day. I'm Darrin Smith, and I'll see you here next time at squatchspot.com.